The woman in the light blue suit pointed her manicured finger directly at my face, her voice dripping with contempt that could curdle milk. "You're just trailer trash playing dress-up, Thatcher." She let out a laugh that echoed through the community center. Turning back to the three police officers standing behind her with their hand resting on their belts. "This vagrant claims he owns our land. Can you imagine? Him?" 300 residents of Cascade Pines Homeowners Association sat in folding chairs, their eyes burning holes through me like I was some kind of circus attraction. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed with that particular frequency that makes everything feel like an interrogation room. I stood alone near the podium, holding a single piece of yellowed papers that smelled like dust and forgotten promises. The police officer closest to me, a sergeant with a weathered face and tired eyes, shifted his weight uncomfortably. He clearly did not want to be here, caught between a hysterical HOA president and a man holding what looked like ancient parchment. But here is the thing about moments like this. The ones where everyone has already decided you are the villain before you even open your mouth. Those are the moments that define whether you crumble or whether you stand your ground and let the truth do the fighting for you. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply lifted that piece of paper higher, letting the camera phones catch every detail of the federal seal embossed in the corner. The date read 1873, and the signature at the bottom belonged to someone whose face was on the $50 bill. Celinda Blackmore's confident smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. She recovered quickly, but I caught it. That tiny crack in her armor. That moment of doubt that told me she knew exactly what I was holding. The sergeant squinted at the document, then back at me. "Sir, I'm going to need you to explain what's happening here." "Sergeant," I said, my voice calm as still water. "What's happening here is that 567 families built their homes on land my family has owned since President Ulysses S. Grant signed this patent deed 152 years ago, and nobody bothered to check the records." The room erupted into chaos. "Let me take you back 72 hours, to a forest clearing at 3 in the morning, where this whole nightmare began with a shovel and a secret my grandfather took to his grave. The pine trees surrounding me stood like silent witnesses as I drove the blade into soft earth. My breath came out in white puffs against the cold October air, and every muscle in my body screamed for rest after 8 hours of digging through undergrowth to find this exact spot. My name is Thatcher Grimwood, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I was nobody special. 38 years old, 12 years working as a forensic document examiner for the state archives, and exactly 0 living relatives who gave enough of a concern to show up when Grandpa Ezekiel finally passed at 94. The funeral had been sparse. A preacher who mispronounced our family name, a lawyer I had never met, and a sealed envelope that changed everything. Inside that envelope was a hand-drawn map, faded with age, marking a location deep in the Cascade Mountain foothills. Grandpa's shaky handwriting covered the margins with instructions so specific they felt like a treasure hunt designed by a man who trusted no one. "Dig where the 3 oaks meet the stream bed. 6 feet down. Do it at night. Trust no one until you understand." So there I was, covered in dirt, my forensic training screaming that this was insane behavior, while something deeper, something inherited, pushed me forward. The shovel struck metal with a clang that echoed through the darkness. I dropped to my knees and brushed away the remaining soil with my bare hands. A steel lockbox emerged from the earth, military grade, the kind they used to store sensitive documents during wartime. The lock had rusted shut over decades, but a few strategic hits with a rock popped it open. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth that had somehow survived the elements, I found 3 items that would turn my entire understanding of reality upside down. The first was a surveyor's map dated 1873, showing 1,000 acres of prime Pacific Northwest territory, marked in careful ink. The boundaries were precise, the landmarks still recognizable even a century and a half later. The second was a patent deed, the original federal document that transferred ownership of those 1,000 acres from the United States government to one Josiah Grimwood, my great-great-great-grandfather. The signature at the bottom made my heart stop. President Ulysses S. Grant had personally authorized this land transfer as part of the Homestead Act expansion. The third item was a letter, handwritten by Josiah himself, explaining how he had purchased this land for 50 cents per acre after serving in the Union Army. He wrote about his dream of building a family legacy that would last generations. But the part that made my blood run cold was the final paragraph. To my descendants who find this, Josiah had written in elegant 19th century script, know that vultures will circle our land. They will claim it through lies and manipulation. The deed stays buried until the rightful heir is ready to fight. The land remembers its true owner. I sat in that forest clearing until dawn broke, reading and rereading those documents with the trained eye of someone who had spent a decade authenticating historical artifacts. Every fiber of my professional being confirmed what my heart already knew. These documents were genuine, and somewhere out there, on land my family had owned since the Grant administration, someone had built an entire community without ever checking who actually held the deed. The drive down from the mountains took 4 hours, and I spent every minute of it trying to piece together how this was possible. The map showed clearly that the Grimwood 1,000 acres encompassed a massive swath of foothill territory, including what modern GPS coordinates revealed to be the exact location of Cascade Pines, a luxury housing development that had sprung up in 1987. 567 homes, average value of $2.5 million each. Total development is easily exceeding $1 billion in current market value, all sitting on land that belonged to me. I pulled into the Cascade Pines entrance at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, my beat-up pickup truck looking absurdly out of place among the Teslas and Mercedes lining the pristine streets. The development was everything you would expect from a wealthy enclave. Manicured lawns cut to exactly 2.5 inches, white picket fences that looked like they had never seen a day of weather, and homes so large they probably had rooms the owners forgot existed. A security booth blocked the main entrance, staffed by a guard in a uniform that looked more military than civilian. "Can I help you, sir?" The guard's tone made it clear he did not actually want to help me with anything. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge of the Homeowners Association." He looked at my truck, then at my dust-covered clothes, then back at my face with an expression of practiced contempt. "Do you have an appointment with Mrs. Blackmore?" "No, but I have something she's going to want to see." The guard picked up a phone, muttered something I could not hear, and a few minutes later, a golf cart appeared carrying a woman whose presence commanded attention even from 50 yards away. Celinda Blackmore was somewhere in her mid-50s, with silver blonde hair styled into a helmet of perfection that probably required an engineering degree to maintain. She wore a light blue designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and her eyes had that particular coldness that comes from spending decades looking down at people she considered beneath her. She stepped off the golf cart and approached my window with the deliberate slowness of someone who wanted me to know my time meant nothing to her. "I'm Celinda Blackmore, president of the Cascade Pines Homeowners Association. Gerald says you have something to show me." I handed her a photocopy of the patent deed, not the original. I was not stupid enough to hand that over to anyone until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. She glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds before laughing. Is this some kind of joke? You drove all the way out here with a fake document claiming you own our land? It's not fake, Mrs. Blackmore, and I'd suggest you have your lawyers take a closer look before you dismiss it. Her eyes narrowed, the friendly facade cracking just enough for me to see the steel underneath. Young man, I don't know what scam you're running, but Cascade Pines has existed for nearly 40 years. We have our own lawyers, our own title insurance, and our own documentation proving every inch of this development is legally owned by our residents. Whatever fantasy you've cooked up in that sad little head of yours, I suggest you drive back to whatever trailer park you came from before I call the sheriff. She threw the photocopy back through my window, and it landed on my lap like a challenge. Ma'am, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because my family has owned this land since 1873, and someone needs to explain how 567 homes got built on it without anyone ever checking the original deed. Celinda stepped back and pulled out her phone, dialing without taking her eyes off me. Sheriff Morrison? Yes, this is Celinda Blackmore from Cascade Pines. I have a trespasser at the main gate making threats against our community. I need officers here immediately. She hung up with a satisfied smile. You have about 10 minutes before you're arrested for trespassing on private property. I suggest you use that time wisely. I did not leave. Instead, I parked my truck just outside the development entrance on the public road and waited for the sheriff to arrive. When the patrol car pulled up 15 minutes later, I was sitting on my tailgate with the original documents spread out on a folding table, ready to present my case to anyone willing to listen. Deputy Martinez was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, with intelligent eyes that actually looked at the documents I showed him, instead of immediately dismissing them. Mr. Grimwood, these papers look old, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're legitimate. I understand that, Deputy. That's why I'm going to the county records office tomorrow to verify the chain of title. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm just asking you to note that I presented these documents peacefully and that Mrs. Blackmore threatened to have me arrested for standing on a public road. He scribbled something in his notepad. Have you considered that even if these documents are real, there might be other legal factors at play? Adverse possession, statutory limitations, that sort of thing? I have, but none of those factors apply if the original deed was never legally transferred. And according to my research, there's no record of any Grimwood ever selling or abandoning this land. Deputy Martinez looked at the patent deed, then at the surveyor's map, then at the massive development rising behind the security gate. Mr. Grimwood, I've lived in this county my whole life. Cascade Pines has been here since I was a kid. Are you really suggesting that hundreds of families bought homes on land that didn't belong to the developers? I'm not suggesting anything, Deputy. I'm stating a fact that can be verified through public records, and I'm going to do exactly that, starting tomorrow morning. He handed the documents back to me with an expression I could not quite read. Good luck with that, sir, and maybe invest in a good lawyer. The county records office opened at 8:30 a.m., and I was waiting at the door when a clerk named Margaret unlocked it. She looked at me with the weary resignation of someone who had spent too many years dealing with the public. Can I help you? I need to research the chain of title for parcel numbers spanning approximately 1,000 acres in the Cascade Mountain foothills. Starting date 1873. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. That's going to take a while, honey. Our older records aren't digitized. You'll need to go through the physical files in the basement. I've got time. She handed me a visitor badge and pointed toward a stairwell that looked like it had not been updated since the 1950s. Knock yourself out. Everything before 1950 is in the blue filing cabinets. Good luck finding anything down there. It's a mess. The basement was exactly as advertised. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into darkness, covered in decades of dust, organized by a system that appeared to have been designed by someone with a profound hatred for logic. I spent the first 3 hours just figuring out the filing methodology before I could even begin searching for relevant documents. But here's the thing about being a forensic document examiner. We are trained to find needles in haystacks. We learn to see patterns where others see chaos, to follow paper trails through bureaucratic labyrinths that would drive normal people insane. By noon, I had found something that made me sit back in my chair and stare at the ceiling. The original Grimwood patent deed had been properly recorded in 1873, exactly as my documents showed. The land transferred cleanly from the federal government to Josiah Grimwood, and remained in the Grimwood family through successive generations via properly filed inheritance records. But in 1986, something strange happened. A document appeared in the files claiming that the Grimwood family line had ended with no surviving heirs, and that the land had reverted to state ownership under unclaimed property statutes. This document bore an official-looking seal and the signature of a county clerk named Harold Denton. There was just one problem. In 1986, my grandfather Ezekiel Grimwood was still very much alive, living in a cabin just 30 miles from where I sat. He had not abandoned the land. He had not died. And he certainly had never signed anything relinquishing his family's claim. The document declaring the Grimwood line extinct was a fraud, and the name of the attorney who had submitted it to the county made my blood freeze. Reginald Blackmore, father of Celinda Blackmore, current president of the Cascade Pines Homeowners Association. I know some of you are probably wondering how I found that box in the first place. My grandfather left instructions, but what made me actually believe them? What made me drive 4 hours into the mountains and start digging at 3 in the morning? I spent the next week building my case with the methodical precision that had made me one of the most respected document examiners in the state. Every morning, I returned to that basement, pulling files, photographing evidence, and constructing a timeline that revealed exactly how the Blackmore family had stolen 1,000 acres from mine. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. In 1985, Reginald Blackmore had been a young attorney with big ambitions and very few scruples. He had somehow learned about the Grimwood land, possibly through old courthouse records he accessed during routine title searches, and realized that the property was incredibly valuable despite appearing abandoned. Rather than try to legally purchase the land, which would have required tracking down my grandfather and paying fair market value, Reginald had taken a shortcut. He fabricated a death certificate for my grandfather, created a false affidavit claiming no surviving heirs existed, and filed documents asserting that the land had reverted to state control. From there, he arranged for a shell company to purchase the unclaimed land from the state for pennies on the dollar. That shell company then sold the land to Cascade Development Corporation, which just happened to be owned by Reginald Blackmore and his business partners. By 1987, the first homes were going up. By 1995, all 567 lots had been sold to families who had no idea they were buying property built on a foundation of fraud. The scheme had worked perfectly for nearly 40 years because no one had ever thought to question it. The original records were buried in a basement that most county employees did not even know existed. My grandfather, traumatized by previous attempts to steal his land, had retreated into isolation and chosen to hide the original documents rather than fight a system he did not trust. And Reginald Blackmore had passed his ill-gotten gains to his daughter, who now ruled Cascade Pines like a feudal kingdom, completely unaware that the truth was about to come crashing down on her empire. But I could not simply walk into a courtroom with 40-year-old documents and expect justice. The legal system had 1,000 ways to delay, deny, and dismiss claims like mine. I needed more than evidence. I needed allies. That is when Harlan Westbrook walked into my life. I was sitting in a diner near the county courthouse, spreading photographs across a booth table and trying to organize my findings, when a shadow fell across my documents. "Mind if I sit down?" The man asking was somewhere in his late 50s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and softened slightly by time. He wore a leather jacket over a plain black shirt, and his eyes had that particular quality I recognized from my years working with law enforcement. Eyes that missed nothing. "Do I know you?" "Not yet, but I know you, Mr. Grimwood. Or should I say, the man who's about to turn Cascade Pines upside down." He slid into the booth across from me without waiting for permission. "Name's Harlan Westbrook, former FBI, currently working private investigation. I've been watching the Blackmore family for 2 years, and you just became the most interesting person in this county." I gathered my photographs protectively. "How do you know who I am?" "Because I was in that records basement yesterday, and the clerk mentioned some guy had been down there for a week straight, pulling files on the Grimwood land. Wasn't hard to figure out what that meant." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I've been trying to nail Celinda Blackmore for fraud, embezzlement, and about 6 other charges, but I could never get the smoking gun. You've got it. And I've got information that'll help you understand just how deep this rabbit hole goes." "Why should I trust you?" Harlan smiled, a predator's smile that suggested he had been waiting for exactly this question. "Because I'm going to tell you something the county records won't show. Celinda Blackmore didn't just inherit this scheme from her father. She's done it before. Twice. In 2 other states. And both times the families who tried to reclaim their land ended up losing everything." The coffee in my cup suddenly tasted like acid. "What happened to them?" "One family's house burned down with all their documentation inside. Ruled an accident. The other family got buried in so many lawsuits they declared bankruptcy before they could even get a court date." Harlan pulled a manila folder from his jacket and slid it across the table. "Celinda's not just a crooked HOA president, Mr. Grimwood. She's a professional, and right now, she's probably already planning how to destroy you." I opened the folder and found myself looking at police reports, court documents, and newspaper clippings from Oregon and Nevada. 2 families, 2 land disputes, 2 complete destruction. "Why are you helping me?" "Because one of those families in Oregon, the ones who lost everything." Harlan's granite face softened with something that looked like old grief. "That was my sister and her husband. They died in that fire. And I've spent every day since then waiting for a chance to bring Celinda Blackmore down." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The diner sounds, clattering dishes and murmured conversations, faded into background noise as I processed what he had told me. "If what you're saying is true, then I'm in serious danger. You've been in danger since the moment you pulled those documents out of the ground, Mr. Grimwood. The question is whether you're going to run or whether you're going to fight." I looked down at the photographs of my evidence, at the patent deed signed by a president, at the letter from an ancestor who had warned me that vultures would circle. "I'm going to fight." Harlan nodded slowly, satisfaction flickering across his weathered features. "Good. Then let me tell you what we're up against, and how we're going to win." The harassment campaign started 3 days later, exactly as Harlan had predicted. First came the anonymous phone calls, heavy breathing at 2 in the morning, then silence, then the click of disconnection, annoying but manageable. Then came the financial attack. My credit card suddenly declined at a gas station. When I called the bank, they informed me that my account had been flagged for suspicious activity and frozen pending investigation. No one could tell me what suspicious activity I had supposedly engaged in. The motel where I had been staying informed me that my reservation had been canceled due to a complaint from another guest. When I asked what complaint, the manager just shrugged and said he was not at liberty to discuss it. I found myself standing in a parking lot at 9 in the evening with nowhere to sleep and no way to access my own money. That is when my truck's windshield shattered. I did not see who threw the rock, only heard the crash and saw the spider web of cracks spreading across the glass like a warning. Harlan found me an hour later, sitting on the curb outside a convenience store that had refused to let me use their phone. "They're moving faster than I expected," he said, surveying the damage to my truck. "That means you're scaring them." "I'm homeless and broke. How is that scaring anyone?" "Because they know what you have, and they know you're not backing down. Celinda's playbook is all about making people give up before things get serious. The fact that you're still here tells her you're different." He handed me a set of keys. "I've got a cabin about 20 miles north. Off-grid, no paper trail. You can stay there while we figure out our next move." "Why are you doing all this for me? You barely know me." Harlan looked at the shattered windshield, then at the darkening sky, then back at me with eyes that held decades of accumulated fury. "Because my sister trusted the system to protect her, and it failed. Because Celinda Blackmore has destroyed enough lives. And because sometimes the universe puts the right people together at the right time." He gestured toward his truck. "Get in. We've got work to do." The cabin was everything Harlan had promised. Small, isolated, surrounded by dense forest that blocked any line of sight from the main road. A wood-burning stove provided heat, a generator provided electricity, and a satellite internet connection provided the one tool I needed most: access to information. Over the next 2 weeks, Harlan and I built what he called our war room. One entire wall was covered with photographs, documents, and red strings connecting people to events to money trails. The spider web of corruption that emerged was staggering in its scope. Celinda Blackmore was not just the HOA president. She was the center of a network that included her brother Harrison, who worked as an assessor in the county tax office; her former college roommate Patricia Thornton, who had been appointed to the county planning commission; a judge named Aldrich Hammond, who owned 3 homes within Cascade Pines and had presided over every legal challenge to the development's legitimacy for the past 20 years. Everyone who might have caught the fraud was either on Celinda's payroll or compromised by their own involvement in the scheme. "It's a closed loop," Harlan explained, tapping the photograph of Judge Hammond. "Every potential check on her power has been neutralized. That's why the families in Oregon and Nevada lost. They tried to fight within a system that was designed to crush them." "So what do we do differently?" Harlan smiled that predator's smile again. "We go federal." The word hung in the air like a promise. The FBI has been trying to build a case against land fraud rings for years, but they can never get enough evidence because local officials bury it. What you have, the original patent deed, the forged documents, the paper trail connecting Reginald Blackmore to the shell company, that's not just evidence of fraud. That's evidence of a conspiracy that crossed state lines. That makes it a federal crime. RICO eligible. RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. the nuclear option of federal prosecution, designed to take down organized crime by holding everyone in a conspiracy accountable for the actions of any member. You think we can actually make that stick? I think we have a better chance with federal prosecutors than with Judge Hammond's courtroom, and I think Celinda knows it, which is why she's trying so hard to make you disappear before you can talk to anyone who matters. I looked at the wall of evidence, at the faces of people who had spent decades profiting from my family's stolen legacy, and felt something cold and determined settle into my bones. How do we get the FBI's attention? We don't just get their attention, Harlan said, pulling out his phone. We get them an invitation to a show they can't refuse. The plan was elegant in its audacity. Rather than approach federal authorities directly, which would give Celinda time to activate her network of lawyers and bought officials, we would force a public confrontation that left no room for cover-ups. Harlan had contacts from his FBI days, people who owed him favors and who had been frustrated by their inability to penetrate local corruption. He made calls, shared evidence, and arranged for federal observers to be present at a very specific event: the Cascade Pines annual homeowners meeting. Every November, the entire community gathered to vote on budgets, elect board members, and hear reports on the state of their beloved development. Attendance was mandatory, according to HOA bylaws, and Celinda used the event as an opportunity to reinforce her authority and crush any opposition. This year, she would have an unexpected item on the agenda. I spent the 2 weeks before the meeting preparing my presentation with the same meticulous care I brought to my professional document examinations. Every claim would be supported by evidence. Every accusation would be documented, and every person who had participated in the conspiracy would be named publicly, on camera, with federal agents watching from the back of the room. The night before the meeting, Harlan and I sat on the cabin porch, watching stars emerge through gaps in the tree canopy. "You know they're going to try to stop you from speaking," he said. "Celinda will have security ready to remove you the moment you walk in." "I know. And even if you get your say, there's no guarantee the feds will act. Politics, jurisdictions, 100 different reasons why this could all fall apart." "I know that too." Harlan was quiet for a moment. "So why are you doing it? You could take your evidence to a lawyer, file a civil suit, spend years fighting in court. It'd be safer." I thought about my grandfather, spending decades in isolation rather than trusting a system that had failed him. I thought about Josiah Grimwood, a Union veteran who had earned his land through service to his country, only to have it stolen by vultures a century later. I thought about Harlan's sister, dead in a fire that was ruled an accident because no one cared enough to look deeper. Because some things are worth the risk. Because my family has been waiting 150 years for someone to stand up and tell the truth. And because if I don't do this now, Celinda will just keep destroying people's lives until someone stops her. Harlan nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a USB drive. "This is a body camera. Records video and audio, uploads directly to a secure cloud server. Whatever happens in that meeting tomorrow, there'll be a record." I took the device and turned it over in my hands. "Thank you, Harlan. For everything." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when Celinda's in handcuffs and your family's land is back where it belongs." The morning of the meeting dawned gray and cold. The kind of autumn day that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I dressed in the one nice suit I owned, the same one I wore to my grandfather's funeral, and drove to Cascade Pines with Harlan following in a separate vehicle. The community center was a massive building near the development's entrance, designed to impress visitors with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking perfectly landscaped gardens. By the time I arrived, the parking lot was already full of luxury vehicles, their owners filing inside for what they thought would be a routine meeting. Celinda stood near the entrance, greeting residents with the practiced charm of a politician on election day. Her light blue suit was immaculate, her smile was radiant, and her eyes went absolutely cold the moment she spotted me walking across the parking lot. Two security guards materialized at her side. "Mr. Grimwood," her voice was loud enough for nearby residents to hear. "I thought we made it clear that you're not welcome in this community. It's a public meeting, Mrs. Blackmore. Your own bylaws state that any party with a legitimate interest in community affairs may request time to address the membership. You have no legitimate interest here." I held up a folded piece of paper. "I have a petition signed by 23 of your residents asking that I be allowed to present evidence of fraud in the original development of Cascade Pines. According to Bylaw 7.4, any petition with more than 20 signatures requires a hearing at the next general meeting." Celinda's smile flickered. She had not expected that. The petition had been Harlan's idea, gathered quietly over the past week from residents who had their own grievances against the HOA, but had never had the courage to speak up. "This is ridiculous." She turned to the security guards. "Remove him from the property." "Mrs. Blackmore," called a voice from behind me, "perhaps you should let the man speak." I turned to see Deputy Martinez approaching, still in uniform, his expression carefully neutral. "This is a private community matter," Celinda snapped. "It doesn't concern the sheriff's department." "Actually, ma'am, I received a complaint this morning about potential fraud and intimidation. I'm here in an official capacity to observe the proceedings and ensure everyone's rights are protected." Celinda's face went through several colors in rapid succession. She clearly wanted to argue, but doing so in front of her own residents would make her look like she had something to hide. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "He can have 5 minutes, but if he makes any false accusations, I'll have him arrested for slander." I walked into the community center with 300 pairs of eyes following my every step, and a body camera recording everything for posterity. The meeting room was arranged with rows of chairs facing a raised platform where the HOA board sat like judges at a tribunal. Celinda took her place at the center, flanked by board members whose faces ranged from curious to hostile. At the back of the room, I spotted 2 men in dark suits who were definitely not Cascade Pines residents. Harlan's federal contacts had arrived. For the first hour, I sat quietly while the board went through routine business. Budget approvals, maintenance reports, a heated discussion about whether the community pool should extend its hours during summer months. Normal HOA business. The kind of mundane details that make people's eyes glaze over. But I could feel the tension building. Residents kept glancing at me, whispering to each other, wondering when the stranger in their midst would make his move. Celinda's smile grew more strained with each passing minute. Finally, she announced that there was one final agenda item before adjournment. "As some of you may have heard," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "there's been a disturbing situation developing over the past few weeks. A man claiming to be related to the original landowners has been spreading malicious lies about our community and its founding. In the interest of transparency, we've agreed to let him speak so that we can all hear his claims and dismiss them as the fabrications they are." She gestured toward me with the magnanimity of someone offering a condemned man his final words. "Mr. Grimwood, you have 5 minutes." I stood slowly, smoothing my suit jacket, and walked to the front of the room. 300 faces stared at me, most of them hostile, a few curious, and 2 at the back showing the kind of professional interest that made my heart beat a little faster. Thank you, Mrs. Blackmore. I'll try to keep this brief. I pulled the original patent deed from my briefcase and held it up for everyone to see. This document was signed by President Ulysses S. Grant in 1873, transferring ownership of 1,000 acres to my ancestor, Josiah Grimwood. That land includes every square foot that Cascade Pines currently occupies. The room erupted in murmurs. Celinda's smile became a thin, dangerous line. The original deed was never legally transferred, sold, or abandoned. In 1986, Mrs. Toole, Blackmore's father, attorney Reginald Blackmore, filed fraudulent documents claiming my family's line had died out. He used those fake documents to steal our land and sell it to developers who then built this community. The murmurs became shouts. People were standing, pointing, demanding explanations. I have the evidence right here, I continued, raising my voice above the chaos. Forged death certificates, fabricated affidavits, a paper trail connecting Reginald Blackmore directly to the shell company that purchased the stolen land. Every home in this community was built on a foundation of lies, and Mrs. Blackmore has known about it her entire life. Celinda shot to her feet, her face contorted with fury. This is slander, pure, malicious slander. Security, remove this man immediately. The guards started toward me, but Deputy Martinez stepped into their path. I'd advise against that, gentlemen. This is now an official investigation. The two men in dark suits were moving toward the front of the room, badges appearing in their hands. Celinda Blackmore, one of them announced in a voice that cut through the chaos. We need to have a conversation about some serious federal charges. And that is when Celinda Blackmore's carefully constructed world began to collapse. The room descended into pandemonium. Residents surged from their seats, some rushing toward the exits, others pressing forward to see what was happening at the front. Celinda stood frozen behind the podium, her light blue suit suddenly looking less like armor and more like a target. You have no jurisdiction here, she stammered, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. This is a civil matter, a property dispute at most. The lead federal agent, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had clearly seen every trick in the book, shook her head slowly. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud across state lines. We've been building this case for 2 years, Mrs. Blackmore. Mr. Grimwood just handed us the final pieces. Celinda's gaze snapped to me, and I saw something I had never expected to see in those cold eyes. Fear. Raw, desperate fear. You don't understand what you've done, she hissed. 567 families, children, grandparents. You're going to destroy them all just to prove a point? No, Mrs. Blackmore. You destroyed them the moment you decided to build their dreams on stolen ground. The agents moved forward, and Celinda's composure shattered completely. She tried to run, pushing past board members, knocking over chairs in her desperate attempt to reach the back exit. But Harlan was waiting there, blocking her path with the patience of a man who had waited years for this moment. End of the line, Celinda. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent room. 300 residents stood motionless, watching their queen fall from her throne. Deputy Martinez formally detained her while federal agents secured the evidence. The charges were already piling up: wire fraud, RICO conspiracy, and money laundering. It was the end of Celinda Blackmore's empire. As they led her toward the door, she turned back one final time, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. This isn't over, Grimwood. My lawyers will bury you. I met her gaze without flinching. Your lawyers are next, Mrs. Blackmore, along with Judge Hammond, your brother in the assessor's office, and everyone else who helped you steal my family's legacy. The FBI has all of it." She had no response to that. The doors closed behind her, and just like that, 40 years of corruption ended in handcuffs and humiliation. The aftermath was chaos of a different kind. Residents surrounded me, some angry, some terrified, all of them desperate to understand what this meant for their homes, their investments, their lives. A woman clutching a crying toddler grabbed my arm. "Please, you have to understand. We didn't know. We just wanted a safe place to raise our family. Are you going to take our home?" I looked at her face, at the genuine terror there, and felt something shift inside me. These people were not the enemy. They were victims too, deceived by the same people who had stolen from my family. "Everyone, please." I raised my hands for the quiet. "I need you to listen carefully." The room gradually settled. 300 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from hostile, wild, to hopeful. "My family has owned this land for over 150 years. Legally, I have every right to evict every single one of you and reclaim what was stolen." I paused, letting that reality sink in. "But I'm not going to do that." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. "What I am going to do is offer every homeowner in Cascade Pines a 99-year lease at $1 per year. You keep your homes, your children keep their schools, your grandparents keep their neighbors. The community survives." The murmurs became gasps, then questions shouted from every direction. "There's one condition," I continued, my voice hardening. "Celinda Blackmore and everyone who participated in this fraud must face justice. Full cooperation with federal investigators. Complete transparency about every crime committed to build this place. That's the price of staying." An elderly man near the front stood slowly, leaning on a cane. "Why?" he asked simply. "After everything they did to your family, why show us mercy?" I thought about Josiah Grimwood, who had survived war and hardship to build something that would last. I thought about my grandfather, who had chosen isolation over vengeance because he understood that some battles cannot be won through force alone. "Because land remembers its true owner," I said quietly. "But forgiveness builds communities. My ancestors didn't claim this ground to create an empire. He claimed it to build a home. Destroying 500 families won't honor his memory. Protecting them will." The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, the elderly man began to clap. Others joined him, the sound building until the entire room thundered with applause. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of the cabin my grandfather had built decades ago, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The legal battles were mostly finished. Celinda had received 15 years. Her brother got 8. Judge Hammond was disbarred and facing his own charges. The families of Cascade Pines had accepted my offer unanimously. The community had renamed itself Grimwood Heights, in a gesture I had not asked for but could not refuse. Harlan joined me on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Federal prosecutors called," he said. "They want to use this case as a template for investigating similar schemes nationwide. Apparently, Celinda wasn't the only one running this kind of operation." I accepted the coffee with a nod. Good. Maybe other families won't have to wait 150 years for justice. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade over the land that had finally returned to its rightful owner. "Your grandfather would be proud," Harlan said quietly. I thought about the box buried in the forest, about the letter warning me that vultures would circle, about the signature of a president preserved through generations of patience and faith. "He knew this day would come," I replied. He just needed the right person to finish what Josiah started. The last rays of sunlight caught the peaks of the mountains, turning them briefly to fire before darkness claimed the valley. Somewhere below, 567 families were sitting down to dinner in homes that would remain theirs for another century. One signature had nearly destroyed them all. But in the end, it was mercy that saved them. And that, I realized, was exactly what my ancestors would have wanted. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please consider subscribing to follow our next journey. What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below.
Thanks for staying to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to IS Stories.